Hey everybody, here for Sunday evening on Getting This Done. Got another ThunderCat for us in the second in this set, which is going to be Tygra. Going to be posting this over to the Facebook group as always, or Facebook page actually, as always, real quick. And going to share this so everybody can join in. And then we are going to knock this sucker out. So let's see here. Live. All right. There we go. Now we can get started on this. I'm going to be knocking it out pretty quick. It's going to be a fun one. I love this character. This is probably my favorite ThunderCat next to Panthro, of course, which is everybody's favorite, especially the 80s kids. It's just one of those things. That dude was just phenomenal. But yeah, Tygra in the new series is actually Lion-O's brother, but in the original, he was Lion-O's mentor and supposed to be his professor, and was a scientist. Was loosely based off of the concept of Gilligan's Island, if you ever knew that show. There was a professor on there that was supposed to be, on a tour and whatnot. Basically, people went to a boat tour and ended up getting deserted on an island. And you can check that out and Google it if you want to find out more information about that one. But as far as this series goes, this guy was supposed to be the scientist of the group and more of a mentor for Lion-O, the leader. And that's what ended up happening. He was his trainer and mentor for fighting skills and education and whatnot. And that's where Lion-O grew up and had the accident in the crash of the ThunderCats landing on Third Earth in the series, and he ended up aging, and it was supposed to be a young boy trapped in a grown man's body because his body aged with a malfunction of the pod he was in. And anyway, this guy is his mentor and educator, and was a way underutilized and underrated character in the original series, and was left high and dry a lot. And that was always a bummer to me because of the fact that this character was phenomenal. He is just one of the best characters out there. And other than, like I said, other than Panthro, because he was more of a fighter, more of a hand-to-hand combat fighter with his nunchucks and such, I was always more drawn towards Tygra and the way he looked, because he just looked more aristocratic and more regal than most of them. And that was just something I connected to, because it was more, he was almost more of the nerd in the group, as it were, because he was always trying to be proper and, diplomatic and whatnot, and stay out of trouble as much as possible, where everybody else was just ready to go if there was a problem. And that was just one of those things. But I always resonated with that character just because of that as a kid. I had mentors in my life that I got really close to, and he reminded me a lot of those type of people that were in my life. I don't talk about it much, but because that's personal family business to me. But my parents divorced right when I was really, really young, and that's one of those things. My dad wasn't always there, and I connected with a lot of my school mentors and things like that, and different life areas. And we all got some kind of story like that, and I don't want to go dramatic into it or get weird like that, because that's not what it's about. What I'm saying is that this character resonated to remind me that as a young person, I did have people in my life that I could count on, and that was one of those things that character reminded me that those people were there, and I just needed to um, bond with them, and it made me respect them even more because of that connection. Believe it or not, you know. Um, so that was one of the takeaways I had from that series. And anyway, this was just one of my favorite characters because of that role that he had and that connection that he had um, with the character of Lion-O and the other Thundercats in the series. He was always the one to go to when you had something going on. Wily Kit and Wily Cat would come to him a lot as well, and he was that figure in that series. And a lot of people, you know, well, when I talk to people about the Thundercats, a lot of people say, you know, that was their favorite one because of the fact that, you know, he was like that resonating character with them, and that was part of it. And I was just like, yeah, you know, I had that same kind of connection as a fan of the series to that character because of that type of personality that he put out. And I want other generations that are beyond me to figure out what that's about for them as well, because a lot of people don't have that connection. And that was part of why I wanted to do this particular series, is because of the fact that I wanted to get to characters like this. And, you know, there was a lot of education behind those things because they had a psychologist. I mean, I mentioned this on Point with Lion-O yesterday, but, you know, they had a psychologist on staff that was all about the kids and all about, you know, educating and learning a lesson, as well as making a great action adventure show. And that was what it was all about. You know, they wanted to make a great science fiction show while still having a bond and a moral out of it to bypass the educational standard, you know, the Educational Act, the Animation the Educational Animation Restriction Act, which it has 2 or 3 names, but the primary point of it, it was put in place to prevent kids from having the same bad influences in cartoons and animation that they had in comic books back in the 50s with the senators and all that, going back into, you know, the hearings for it causing children to be, you know, blah 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 and whatever. A lot of that was to remove that from animation as well, and to make sure that they did have an educational purpose, and to teach that, you know, just because violence did ensue as worst case scenario, it was to understand that you know, you still had to take consideration of other options first, and that's what they always did. I'm gonna fix that chin there because it makes him look kind of sad, and I don't want him to look sad. I'm gonna straighten this out. There we go. It cracks me up because a lot of these characters have clown style faces to match up to the cat style that they had in their, you know, in their characteristics and whatnot. And this is one of those things. It always had that funky wave clown look kind of thing going on. I got to put in the crest line here for the big wave that goes right across his forehead and right above his brows there to make him look right. So, you know, he looks like Tygra now. And we're going to go in and I'm going to thin that lip down a little bit because it's a little creepy, man. I don't like the way that mouth looked, so it made him look a little soft, you know, almost like they were too full, like a woman's lip, and it's just a little awkward. So we're going to tighten that down a little bit. Make him look more like a dude. There we go. Much better. And a lot of people always overdraw that stuff, and I'm just like, nah, I don't want to do that. So we're not going to have, you know, Elvis lips or something, you know, crazy like that. This dude has like I said, a very masculine look, so I want to keep it that way. But he's also one of the youngest of the, other than Chitara, he is one of the youngest Thundercats Panthro was like the old dog of the crew, and that was one of those things. You know, he was the closest in age. Next to Chitara, he was actually closest in age to the Lion-O character. And then you had Kit and Kat, which were supposed to grow up with him, Lion-O, and they didn't age at all. So they were all supposed to grow up together. But yep. And they even implied it once that the Wile E. Kit and Kat character from the original series were supposed to be siblings from the same litter. But then they didn't want to have to explain that, so they dropped that storyline. They didn't want to have to explain that to kids, so they dropped that. They dropped that storyline real quick. I mean, they mentioned it in like one episode, and they had mentioned Jaga saying that they were of the same litter. You know, when you talk to Lion-O, because his ghost would come up, Jaga's ghost would come on and talk to Lion-O after he died and stuff, and it was kind of, you know, like Obi-Wan Kenobi using the Force with Luke for a while. It had that kind of feel to it. And that's part of the reason I love those cartoons so much, is they would take from every aspect of whatever was pop culture at the time and mix it into one. And that was the reason they were at TV Guide's top cartoon, because TV Guide used to do their own ratings of shows, and they would do all these weird ratings and stuff for animation and, you know, the top TV show of the day kind of thing, you know, the daily talk show or the daily news show and all that. And right there at the top for like 6 months, it was nothing but ThunderCats. I mean, it was the #1 rated show for the entire time it ran, short of the last season. And I think it fell to like number 4 or 5 over a couple of other things. I think they revamped G.I. Joe and Transformers for Gen 2, and that's when it fell off a little bit. But it was a top-rated show. I mean, it was in the top 5 for the entire time it ran. And that was just one of those things. But yeah, they didn't want to have to explain, well, the birds and the bees to people, and why, you know, well, why wasn't this mentioned before? And now why is Lion-O, you know, kin to Wile E. Kit and Wile E. Cat? And so, because I believe that, if I remember right, I believe the point was that they were supposed to be of the same litter, but they were also supposed to be his guardians, his bodyguards. And that may be what the story was. I'm not sure. I'm not 100%. But because, like I said, they never went into that. And as soon as they started barking up that tree, parents were like, hey, and they were like, oops. So they didn't do that anymore. But yeah, that was always a funny one to me. Who was the one? Jim asked who the one with the nunchucks was. That was Panthro. That's the one that I'll be doing after Chitara on Chitara's tomorrow, and Panthro's next after that. I'm going to do Wile E. Kit and Wile E. Cat as well, but I'm going to do Panthro the day after tomorrow, so we're talking Tuesday. So that was the one with the nunchucks. So, yep. That just blew me away with the animation, because, you know, everybody's like, well, you know, they don't do animation like that here now. Well, they never did. As far as the animation for the show, part of what made this so intense was that they sent these over to Japan to be animated. A lot of people didn't know that. And I don't believe they would have bought into it as much if they hadn't have done it, because the way this series was produced is the animation was still cells and stop motion, and that's the reason it had such a deep richness to it that a lot of series don't. And I just found that just extremely fascinating that they got away with that. because on the budget they were doing it. If it hadn't have been Filmation, I don't think it would have happened anywhere else. But they're the same crew that did the Transformers, because Suncoast and Marvel Studios and whatnot did all of their animation through this same Japanese company that did the Transformers. They did G.I. Joe. They did He-Man. All of the major characters that we know from those series, and they did them in still cell animation, and they did them 3 times faster than anybody else as well, which just was a riot within itself. Because at the time, at that quality, it took an American studio just months and months and months to make it animation, movie feature film quality, and they were knocking them out 2 and 3 a month over there. And it's just one of those things. It was more affordable to make it. I'm not going to necessarily say cheap, because those studios were very expensive even back then. And it was just one of those investments they made to make that happen. And I was just always a huge fan of seeing how they made this stuff. You can go on YouTube and there's a making of the ThunderCats behind the scenes thing. It's a documentary they did, and you can see who all the voices and stuff were. If it's going to bust your bubble and you don't like to know who does it and see the face of the actor, then don't do it, because it will ruin that effect for you. But if you're looking just for finding out who was doing what and how they did it, and you like that behind the scenes and bonus footage stuff, then definitely check it out. It's a great watch. It's a very interesting hour of just great stuff. I'm going to go in here and put this line in and thicken this up, because I want him to be a little heavier in the chest, and I don't want it to look too shallow. Do you want it to look too shallow for the cut that I'm doing? Because he was one of the leaner characters, and he's not as big as Lionos or Panthro either. So I just want to make sure that he looks right. Putting in a couple of shadows here and there. Like I said, these are sketch cards, and they tend to get that going on. Some of them tend to have more of a sketchy look, but that's okay though. That's why they're sketch cards. But I just want to add in this diaphragm here in this rib cage, and I'm going to put it high because, like I said, Panthro's one of the bigger guys, and so is Lino, and Tygra's just a little bit leaner and smaller. So we can put it a little high like that. And then we can draw it down here to put in the bottom to make it actually look like a diaphragm, so he's breathing. Run up there and whack him in the breadbasket. Shadow in this collarbone here. And the funny thing was, is whenever you see the armor, I'll tell you some of the funny, the best parts of the series, excuse me, was the Exodus, where they actually landed on Third Earth. I'm going to put in this little trim here because he's got this sleeve over. One of the funniest parts of the series was the Exodus. When they came out of their pods, they were all naked, and everybody was freaking out because they had, no nipples or anything going on. And they did look like bare action figures. It was great. I remember being a kid, and my younger brother and I were just busted up laughing about that. It's like they started the series and they're all naked. My folks were freaking out. It was great. They hadn't put on their armor yet. They call these their armor, the uniforms they wear. But which is funny because most of them are unitards, and just great memories for those things. They crack me up to no end. Now I know this isn't the best logo in the world, so bear with me here. I am doing this on a coin, on the fly here, and I haven't drawn this thing in like, oh God, 20 years. So bear with me here. If it looks a little funky, I'll clean it up. But yeah, for the most part, we've got it to look like the ThunderCats symbol. And the funny thing is, in the original series, they a funny thing about the symbol was is it didn't show until they got to be until they got called on in the original for the Exodus, and then as the show went on, they put on the armor, and first time they got called, it stayed. It activated them as ThunderCats. And yes, I know this is horrible, but like I said, we're going to do with what we got here, and it's a sketch card. We're going to move on. But yeah, it was just a red disc in the first storyline, and then when they got called on and it got activated, that's when they went into being active ThunderCats, and it started to stay there and whatnot. And I used to love it because they would get in and they would have half the character icons. If you check it out and watch it frame by frame, you'll see where they missed, and they like put the eye patch on the wrong side of an eye, or wrong. They'll have the wrong color stuff, or they'll have the wrong outfit on them, and it'll flash in a cell. But they left it in there because they painted it already and they needed the motion. So what they did was they just sped it up over that one and would skip it. And you could still see where they shot the original. So watch those shows and check them out. They got stuff like that. If you guys are a fan of, I know it's off the air now because it got canceled due to ABC being just weird. Tim Allen's series, Last Man Standing. There's a couple of them. They'll be talking in the kitchen, and all of a sudden there'll be a chair at the table, and then the next shot, when it goes back to that same angle, the chair's gone because they've cut to a different take for that. So it cracks me up to watch stuff like that. There's one episode where the girls in Last Man Standing, same series, where they had breakfast. They were eating breakfast, and the milk. They had 3 different types of milk. They had a red one, a green one, and a blue one. And if you watch, it changes colors on the counter and on the table. The ThunderCats did that a lot. There would be guns missing off the Thunder Tank and things like that. That series used to bust me up. I'll tell you another one to check out. The old, what is it? The old Dark Shadows. If you've never seen that series, watch it, because whenever they would pass a microphone or whatever, would be in the mirror. You'd see cameramen in the reflections of the windows and all kinds of stuff. But this ThunderCats series actually had a lot of bloopers in it too, and they left them on purpose for fan tracks and would play them at parties. And they would also animate the bloopers from the soundtracks. The animators were paid to put in extra blooper reels by the producers so that they could take outtakes and play them at parties of where they would snap their lines and mess them up and improv over them, where they'd swear or whatever. And I tell you, it's in that documentary. You can go on YouTube and check it. And they have a couple of clips from that in there. And I tell you what, that was hilarious. This series is come and gone, and it's just not, there's nothing else like it out there. It's just one of those series that's just highly underrated. And, nobody comes close. Even with the Cartoon Network revival of the second volume of the series, the revamp, it still does not hold up to this one. It just doesn't. If you guys get a chance, check that out and see for yourself. It's just a piece of animation history that we need to take into consideration and keep it alive. I had one guy tell me that it was before his time. I was just like, really? You just don't go back and check stuff, People just don't go back and check things anymore, and they don't deal with anything that's not 5 days ago. I've hit that age now to where it's just like, this stuff is, really interesting, where a lot of the modern animation just isn't. But be sure and check it out for yourself, and go out there and test it and find out which character works for you in the original series. But anyway, my ramblings are over with. Hey, Matt, my ramblings beyond that point are done. We're going to call it a day, and this is Tygra. I hope you guys dig it. you can Google him and check him out, Tygra from the ThunderCats, and check him out and see exactly more of what he looks like and get different perspectives on him. This is work to see it in my style. Gonna reach back here real quick. If you can't hear me right at the moment, don't freak out. I'm just gonna throw up this Lion-O next to him so you guys can kind of see where this is going and my take on it. So anyway, we will see you guys tomorrow with Chitara, and there's a little sneak peek for you. That's what she's going to look like right there. So I will catch you guys tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out with me on your Sunday and giving me a little time. I appreciate it. Talk to you later.